Thank you for coming. I've got the honor of closing down PHP Day, and I realize, although the bottles are already on the chairs, that I'm between you and your beer or Aperol Spritz. So I'm going to learn today about how you can handle that. So welcome. Hi, my name is Stefan, and I was asked to tell you something about learning. So let's make this room a classroom, a very big classroom. And let me tell you some stories. Most of these stories, or actually all of these stories, come from the past, give or take, 20 years that I've been doing PHP. So we're going to basically travel through time, and hopefully by the end, we'll get back to the future. So you're all here, and hopefully for the past days, you've been putting a lot of information into your heads. Things about GraphQL, maybe Composer, Doctrine, refactoring, serverless, maybe blockchain, crypto, mental health, flags. I love the flags. Although I was a bit disappointed that it wasn't actually fun with flags. Sheldon Cooper was missing. Maybe you've learned something about Symfony or any of the other topics. Is there anyone in this room that hasn't learned a thing this weekend? See? Everyone learned something. That's good. I also want to tell you something about why you should be learning. Because, you know, all of you are here to learn something, but why should we be learning? Why are we here, aside from the Aperol Spritz? And of course, the beautiful city of Verona. Has anyone not been into the city of Verona this weekend? Everyone's been there. Oh, no, there's a couple of... Oh, you still have some time left, right? When's your flight tomorrow? 8 a.m. Oh, okay, that's gonna be... you've got a full night ahead of you. So, let's go. So as I mentioned, I've been doing PHP for about 20 years now. So I'm gonna go back to the beginning. It was 1997. And 1997 was the year that hardcore and gabber music was really popular in the Netherlands. This was an average weekend for youth in the Netherlands, or at least for a lot of people. It was also the year that the Titanic started sinking, and it sunk over and over and over and over again. I must have seen the movie about 10 times. Every single time at the end, Leonardo died. It was also the year that the first Harry Potter book was published. Has it been 20 years? Yes. But it was also the year that I started learning PHP. I was doing an internship at the local university, and I'd been building websites using just HTML. We didn't have CSS back then, and JavaScript was, you know. So it was mostly HTML, and a colleague told me, you know, you should look into PHP, because then if you want to add another page to your website, you don't have to update all of the other pages to link to this new page. I was like, oh, that's interesting. PHP 3 at that point was the version to work with. How many people here have used PHP 3? This is better than my previous time I did this talk. I was the only one, basically. All of the files ended in .php 3. We didn't know any frameworks. There were no frameworks. And just a year later, I was doing all of my database management using phpMyAdmin. That was basically the only way to do database management, even on production. And you know, back then, if you wanted to learn, there wasn't a lot of resources out there to learn. You could use the manual, but it wasn't as good as it is now. You could, you know, read books, but there was a very small selection of books about PHP back then. And you could maybe read some blogs, you know. That was something of a thing back then. My first PHP book that I bought was Core PHP Programming by Leon Atkinson. Does anyone remember that book? Yeah, a couple of people, that's good, that's good. Shout out to Leon Atkinson for that book. And back then, you could download some scripts from a site called SourceForge. Yeah, I see some people smiling. That's good, that's good. So that was PHP back then. That was learning back then. It was downloading scripts, reading one of the 4 or 5 books that were available, and just trying things. And PHP back then, it wasn't what PHP is right now. PHP was embedded inside of the HTML. You had an HTML page, and then somewhere in between there would be a query to get some stuff from the database. And then, you would echo whatever you needed to echo at that point. That was PHP back then. At the top of most files, there were like 20 include or require statements. I see people nodding their heads. This is good. And the whole concept of don't repeat yourself meant you had one config.php that had your database credentials in it, so that you wouldn't have to have it in every file. Because that was annoying. The first site I built, I had it in every file. And then my web host changed the password. And I had to go through every file to change the password. What I did have back then was every file at the start had a MySQL connect statement at the top. So while I was preparing this talk, I started looking for my first piece of PHP code. Luckily, I couldn't find it. So my baby steps into PHP was a hobby project. I was like, okay, I want to try out this PHP. What am I going to do? Let me think of, my hobbies. I like music. I like movies. Wait, I like reading fantasy books. Let's create a page where I can, put up my collection of fantasy books, and I can write a little review about each book, things like that. So I could keep track of my collection and share my opinion on every book. And that was fun. And it wasn't that fancy because, the only thing it basically did was, I'd put everything into the database using phpMyAdmin. So the only thing it was displaying the information. I was like, okay, I want to make another step. So why not take this first hobby project and create it into a site that other people can also use? So I would add registration, a login system. People could manage their own data without using phpMyAdmin. Of course, back then, I had no idea about security. I'm so surprised this site never got hacked. I don't know. So my point being, a hobby project is a great way of learning something new. And in this case, for me, it was PHP, learning to program in PHP. You figure out, you run into problems, you figure out how to solve them, stuff like that. So if you don't have a hobby project yet, and you've learned about some cool new technology this weekend, start a hobby project. Don't use blockchain. That's what I learned from Fabien. So, next step for me was to start doing something with open source. And at some point I was building a website and I'd installed PHPBB 1.4. And it was great. And I was like, what if I could do something to contribute back to this great open source project? But I wasn't a good programmer at that point. I mean, I didn't even check for the input in my login form, So I'm like, okay, what can I do? And I was like, okay, I've got some experience with PHPBB now. Why don't I just start answering questions? They have a support forum, and of course they have a support team, but I can also answer a question. I'm a user, I've got some experience with the forum, I can answer some questions. So I started answering some questions, And at some point, I got a private message from one of the people from the phpday team. We've been seeing that you've been answering a lot of questions. This is pretty cool. Do you want to join our support team? I was like, oh, well, that's pretty cool. So I joined the support team, and well, I answered a lot of questions. And people always say there are no stupid questions. I disagree. After that, I even became the support team lead. Someone thought it was a good idea to let me lead the support team. And that was quite a lot of fun. And I learned a lot of things doing this. One of the things being there's a lot of cool people that can do cool stuff. There's also a lot of awful people that can be really annoying. Especially in the time when phpday 2 came out and we had a couple of minor security incidents. We had a lot of haters. People that really, yeah, I don't know. But I also learned, okay, so you can do PHP really well, you can also write really crappy code with PHP. But what I also learned is that it is good to have this knowledge and not just keep it inside your head. Share it with other people. Make sure that you're not the only one that has this information, because, at some point, someone may just disappear. They may get sick or just have no interest in PHP anymore. And then other people have this information in their head as well. This is a good idea. So, if you don't do anything in open source yet, start contributing to an open source project. Just look at one of the projects that you use a lot and start looking at what can I do to contribute. And it doesn't have to be code. Documentation is very important for open source, and it's still something that not a lot of people spend time on. Answering questions is very important for open source projects. Stuff like that. So, in those days, an email mailing list was started for Dutch PHP developers. And at some point, someone sent an email and said, hey, guys, I've heard about this concept that's been popping up in countries around us. I want to start a user group. Who's in? I was like, oh, that's cool. A user group. I want to contribute to that. Now, back then, user groups really weren't a thing. These days, in the Netherlands alone, we've got like 20 or 25 user groups. I don't know how it is in Italy. How many do you have? Nobody knows. Okay, so start looking for your local user group. Anyway, so what happened was this guy, Rijn, he sent the email. And at some point we got together in a very small village somewhere, and we started looking, what can we do to start a user group? Okay, so we have to organize something. We have to find a location. We have to, promote this to, how do we reach PHP developers? Twitter didn't exist yet. We didn't have promotional stuff like that. So what I learned from starting a user group was to organize, to collaborate with other people, to communicate to large groups of people, things like that. So if you want to not only improve your programming skills, but also improve other skills that are important, like communication, organizing stuff, things like that, check your local user group. They'll probably need some help. And I also made a couple of good friends in that time. Rijn is one of them, Kana, Remy. They're all people that have been there at the start of the PHP community in the Netherlands. And since I'm mentioning people that I got influenced by, I need to also mention Ivo. Ivo was working for TomTom as a team lead when I joined TomTom, I don't know, somewhere 2003, 2004. PHP 5 was out back then, but I hadn't really done anything with it. I was still using PHP 4. And I thought I knew object-oriented programming really, really well. I've been doing OO for a couple of years using PHP 4. So then I joined TomTom. And at TomTom, they were already using PHP 5. They were using Mojave framework. Anyone know Mojave framework? It's still the same people. They were using a framework. I didn't even know what a framework was. They were doing testing right. They had like one tester for every 2 developers. Now that's scary when the tester comes to your desk, because that means you've made a mistake. But Ivo was there, and he was like a mentor. He was helping me grow as a developer. He taught me how to do real object-oriented programming. He taught me, well, it was the testers that taught me that I had to test my own shit before I pushed it to them. He taught me basically how to be a good team player. So if you're stuck in your growth and you want to get that next step, find a mentor. You're all doing PHP. There is php-mentoring.org where you can look for a mentor and get in touch with someone that can help you make that next step. They won't teach you everything, but they can push you in the right direction and coach you along the way. Now, if you're a senior developer, you could become a mentor. And that will help you learn a lot of stuff about the other side of mentoring. It will help you, learn about sharing knowledge, getting people to that next step, and maybe learn something about yourself in the process. So, after my first use of a cool modern framework like Mojave, frameworks became big. And, when frameworks became big, I wasn't just using PHPBB anymore, or Joomla anymore, Drupal. I was actually building the next Joomla, or Drupal, or PHPBB. So instead of just integrating existing software, I started creating the software that was going to be used. And all of a sudden, architecture became important. Now, architecture was something, I don't have any formal computer IT education at all. So architecture was not something that I got taught in school. So this was new for me. So one of the most important things I learned in this period is that you should always take your time to learn something. Don't just start and do stuff, learn about it. One thing, for instance, a good lesson that I learned was I was working at a company and we were going to build a new version of a software as a service, which was something, the term didn't exist back then, but we were doing software as a service. And we needed to make a decision on what framework to use. So I was, creating a nice feature matrix, this framework does this, and this framework does this, and that's very cool. And then a colleague of mine said, have you actually tried them? I was like, no, that takes time. And he was like, yeah, sure. Let's take a day and let's look at the frameworks that we think are the best for our job, and let's just try them out. So we started using Symfony. I think it was 0.6 point something, and we started using Zen Framework, which is also still not 1.0 stable. And we found out after a day's work, damn, Symfony is so much easier than Zen Framework, which back then, in my opinion, for our use case, was true. Okay, so I'm biased. I like Symfony. So we decided to build the whole application on top of Symfony 1, and we even started organizing events. I think Fabienne is in the back right there. Symfony Camp was the first Symfony event, right? We organized the first Symfony event ever, and that was a lot of fun. At least I had a lot of fun. Stuff like that. And by doing that, something happened. I got an email. Do you want to do a conference talk at our conference, Dutch PHP conference? Now this was 2007, so that's 11 years ago. On my birthday, I was asked to do a talk about symphony because people had noticed online that I somehow was involved with symphony. So I went to Amsterdam and I was really scared. But I did my talk and the feedback was pretty good, so I was happy. And this is something which, started, well, I guess what you would call a speaking career, which so far led me to, well, here. But I've also been to the US, I've been to, Spain, England, France, all over Europe, Canada. And in that process, over the past 11 years, I learned about public speaking. I learned about how conferences are a great way of being inspired. I don't necessarily learn a lot of details at conferences, but I learn the big picture. And that big picture can help me, 2 years from now, I can run into an issue and think, wait a minute, there was this conference and I learned about this topic. Now I need to dig into it a bit more, because this could solve my problem. Of course, you already know that you're here. At least I hope you're all here voluntary and not sent by your boss. In terms of conferences, I would recommend to not just stick to a PHP conference. Look beyond PHP. Go to a Docker conference, go to Elasticsearch conference, go to a Git conference. And I saw at the opening yesterday, there is a huge list of conferences here in Italy. So go to another one. If you're a programmer, go to a designer conference. Things like that. Think out of the box. And also go to a conference that's not in Italy, because you're going to learn or meet a lot of new people that you haven't met before that may have other information and knowledge and experience that can help you. So whether it was my talk at DPC or not, but iBuildings, the organizer of Dutch PHP conference, they asked me to join their company. And I was okay, that's cool. That's cool. And at iBuildings, I got to do much more than just Symfony. I learned that there were other frameworks out there that were really good and good at solving different problems. So there I worked with Symfony, but also with Send Framework. I worked with CodeIgniter, I worked with ATK. And I was also doing more than just programming, because they asked me to deliver training. They asked me to do consulting, security audits, stuff like that. And you cannot just do a security audit. You have to learn a bit about security before you do that. And I won't mention my login form from the start of the talk. Another thing I really learned was, because the headquarters of iBuildings was like a 2-hour drive away from where I lived, so I was able to work remote for most of the time. And working remote is a great way to learn how to communicate, because communicating on such a distance is a lot harder than you think. So I learned to communicate, and I learned to talk to people that have problems communicating over such a long distance. And I also learned that a 2-hour drive is fun, but not if there's a traffic jam and it turns into 4 hours. Another thing I learned was testing. There was a project, they needed someone to test the project, and I started testing, and I really annoyed my colleague, because I started doing what the user could do instead of what he was supposed to be doing. And he was really annoyed when I found some bugs. So, but you're not supposed to do that, I know, but I can. And DPC brought me more cool stuff. Because at DPC, it was at DPC when I met Mike. And Mike, when I got, tired of the commuting, Mike talked me into joining the company that he was working for. And it turns out that Mike wasn't just another nice coworker, so you have several of them, I hope. He turned out to be one of my best friends, and right now, he's still working for me. So conferences are not just about learning things, but also about finding potential coworkers. So if you're recruiting, there was a big board at the entrance. You know, write down that you're looking for people, and maybe someone will respond to that. Now, the job working with Mike was really great. But I had a bit of an issue. And the issue already was highlighted when I tried to join that company. Because during my interview, they were looking at my resume and they were like, wait a minute, you've worked at that company for a year there, half a year there. How do we know you're going to spend more than a year with us? And I was like, I don't know. And indeed, after about a year, I was like, maybe I want to do something else. I was like, maybe I should start my own business. But yeah, well, where to begin? And I was on holiday in the south of the Netherlands, and a friend of mine who lives in Belgium came up to the Netherlands, and we chatted for a day, and that was Michelangelo van Dam. And he helped me basically, you know, decide that I indeed wanted to start my own business. And he also helped me with information on what to do when you're starting your own business. So, just like Ivo a couple of years before, Michelangelo, he was a mentor to me. Not about PHP programming, well, maybe a bit. You know, Michelangelo in testing, if you're not testing, get him aboard and you're testing all right. But he was a mentor for me about starting my own business, running a business, you know, what's involved in running a business, things like that. And so, after that talk and talking to my wife, it's like, okay, we can do that. We're going to start our own business. And that's the business I'm still running today. And I've learned so much by running my own business. Not just about programming, although I've learned a lot about programming because I've been into so many different companies that all do things in their own way that I've learned a lot about technology and how not to apply it. But I've also learned about finance, planning, communication, dealing with employees, because now I actually have employees as well. There's so many things that I learned. I learned how to get into financial trouble and how to get out of it. I've seen so many different companies. I've done code reviews, I've done pair programming, I've done so many things. All of the things that you hear at every conference, I've done them by now. And I've learned about that. So, let's go back to 1997. Back then, I just learned PHP 3. I didn't know anything about architecture. I didn't know anything about design patterns, about object-oriented programming, frameworks, anything that was not PHP, I had no clue. If I had the same knowledge now as I had back then in 1997, I would have been pretty useless. I could never have done the things that I do now. I could never have been here in Verona and enjoying a nice conference with you, enjoying the city, enjoying the great risotto that I had on Thursday. I would have never been able to do a keynote at my two favorite conferences, PHP Northwest in Manchester and here at phpday. And I would never have had all the friends I have in the PHP community, a couple of who are here. So, don't ever stand still. It is very important in technology, especially today, with stuff happening so much. It's very important to never stand still and to keep on learning. Make sure to, learn more about the stuff that you already know, but also make sure to learn more about the stuff that you don't know yet. So don't just, increase the knowledge you have on the stuff you're already doing. Step out of that comfort zone. Look at other topics. I mentioned design, but writing is also a very important topic for a developer. Improve your speaking skills. Talk to your local user group, because in your local user group, you can probably get on stage to do your first talk. back then we didn't really have user groups when I started the whole speaking thing. So I started at a conference. I can tell you, start at a user group, please. It's much better for your heart. Learn about coaching skills. If there's one thing very important to get to that senior level, it's coaching skills and communication skills. And maybe, and this is scary, learn some management skills. So I'll give you a moment right now. Think about where you are right now in your career. Think about the stuff that you've accomplished and that make you proud. Okay, there you go. Oh, okay, that's enough. Now think again. Where do you want to go? What is your next step? Because we can't know what, 15 years from now we have no idea what technology will be like. Will there still be a cloud? Will we all be going serverless? Or maybe everything is in the blockchain? Does PHP even exist in 15 years? We don't know. If we trust everyone that's not using PHP, PHP is a dying language. And yet I saw some graphs. Oh no, it wasn't a graph, I learned that today. A diagram, yes. So don't look ahead 15 years. Even the question that I sometimes get when I talk to a potential customer, what will you be doing in 5 years? That's a stupid question. We don't know what we'll be doing in 5 years. So look ahead 1 year, or maybe 2, and now make a plan on how to get there. And a plan is nice, and it will help you along the way. But make sure that somewhere along the way, you also evaluate your progress. See where you are at that point, and whether or not the goal that you have in mind is still the right goal. Don't be afraid to fail, because you learn a lot more by failing than by succeeding. If you succeed, it might just be a coincidence. If you fail, you know that at least that won't work. So learn and do stuff, and get more knowledge, and step out of your comfort zone, and then hopefully in 1 or 2 years you can say, well, I nailed it, I accomplished something, and I learned something, and I'm now at a point where I wanted to be a year ago. So basically, don't stop learning, ever. Now good luck with making your plans, and 2 years from now, okay, so this is a deal, guys from the organization, 2 years from now I will be here again, and you will be telling me about all the stuff you've learned over the past 2 years. And you'll be telling me where you are right now and that you're really, really proud of what you've accomplished in that time. Thank you very much.